At this time, I'd like to welcome everybody to the Excellence through Quality Improvement Project QIOnTheFly Web Meeting number 2, using perception of care indicators for rapid improvement cycles. We're very pleased that you all took this afternoon to join us. We're very excited to be connecting with a lot of folks that we've seen before at some of our other offerings, including the Ideas program. And I just wanted to remind you all that the session is being recorded. We do want to be able to share this material on our YouTube channel as well as our website. You'll see that by default we have muted everybody as well as had cameras turned off. And it is, of course, your choice if you do want to turn on your camera and show your image throughout the webinar. So for those of you that haven't used Zoom while you've been working from home, we're going to go through some of the primary functions. If you do wish to unmute yourself, please click on the little microphone icon. And to control showing your camera or not, you can click on the little video camera icon. Throughout the webinar itself, we do ask that you keep yourself on mute, and if you do have a question, you can type it in the chat box, and we'll go over that on the next slide, but we will be monitoring that throughout the webinar. And you can see on the right-hand side at the bottom of your screen, you'll have a little chat there that I see many of you are familiar with, as we've had the opportunity to do some introductions through the chat already. So learning objectives for today's webinar. By the end of the webinar, we hope that you understand the importance of collecting perception of care feedback from clients and tenants during COVID-19. We want to introduce the concept of using select OPOC questions for our QI-on-the-Fly initiative that the E-QIP team has started. Check out a new tracking template for using OPOC questions for rapid improvement cycles. And lastly, share and receive tips on administering the OPOC questions in a virtual environment. So the origins of QI-on-the-Fly work, why this seemed like a good time to start this initiative. We are in an unprecedented time with many competing priorities. We know that everybody, especially in the community mental health and addiction sector, is balancing the importance of safety for all with meeting client and tenant needs. We're hearing from our agencies that there's lots of creative approaches, which are essentially change ideas being implemented rapidly and altered as you gather data and input from team members, as well as clients and tenants about what is working, what is not. And we know that some of these change ideas will continue after the pandemic is over as new ways of operating, and others are more specific to COVID-19 and will not be sustainable or as relevant once we pass this unique phase. So I'll introduce myself very briefly. My name is Ash. I'm part of the E-QIP team, and I'm joined by several of my colleagues today. We have our co-program manager, Amy Patel, co-directors, Debbie Bang and Noshaba Begeni on the phone, as well as our QI coach, Laura Daly-Trottier. Our wonderful panelists and partners today are Deanna Huggett, who is the manager of implementation at QIMHA's Provincial System Support Program, or PSSP. We have Nancy Brakovic, who's Director of Clinical Support Services and Privacy Officer at the wonderful QIMHA Peel Dufferin, and Chris Sullivan, who's an Implementation Specialist at QIMH's PSSP program. So welcome to our panelists, and thank you so much for joining us today. And many of you are familiar with our model for improvement, which you'll see on the left-hand part of your screen. And on the right, you'll see an image of the QI-on-the-Fly template that E-QIP has developed to document these rapid cycle improvements and change ideas that are taking place in the time of COVID-19. This template was designed to support you in documenting these ideas, as we feel it will be very important when you're looking at future work like pandemic planning and seeing how decisions were made and what worked and what didn't. And you can find this template on our website that we'll go over later. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Deanna, and she will guide us through the next part of the webinar.
Thank you, Ash. And I'm actually going to ask you to turn back on my video. For those of you who know me, you know that I actually do like the video function because I think it keeps me extra accountable. And I know I always like to have a face and a name put together. So you can scroll through at the top and find me, and I'll stay on video for the next little bit. So thank you for joining us. And I also just want to send a quick thank you to our partners that we're working on the E-QIP project with. This has been, this particular webinar and the work that we've been doing over the last little bit has been, it's been really fun to see the real connection between the OPOC work that we have been doing through QIMH's Provincial System Support Program and implementation and all the work that's being done on the ground, and the QI work that's been done through E-QIP over the last number of years. This is a really fun opportunity to see those worlds blend together, and hope you will enjoy what we have to offer today, and we can have lots of discussion at the end and moving forward after that. So I'd like to start by just kind of seeing who's on the line and what kind of our knowledge is regarding the Ontario Perception of Care tools. So Ash, if you can bring up the first poll question, I'd really like to get a bit of an understanding of which region, for starters, which region of Ontario Health are you located in? So Ash, are you able to bring up that poll question?
I'm just having a little bit of an IT issue.
Okay. You know what? We can do it by the chat box as well. So as I'm talking, if you can just sort of let me know if you are west, north, east, Toronto Central, throw that into the chat box, kind of let us know where you're coming from. It would be great for us to get an understanding sort of the regional distribution that we have here. That's great. And as you're doing that, I'd also like to get a bit of an understanding about whether your organization uses OPOC to measure the client experience. So do you already administer the OPOC within your organization or organizations that you're connected with? So seeing that we have lots of people from all over the province, which is great. Yes, 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 yes. That's great. It seems like everybody's using the OPOC so far that has responded, which is lovely. Thank you. And our final question that I'd like to ask you is, have you used OPOC questions as part of a measurement strategy for a specific quality improvement project? So have you used OPOC data in the past for QI work? And seeing a bit of a mix here, yes from some, no from others. No, some are using their own tools and haven't, but yes, so a real mixed bag. That's great. Super. Ash, if you could advance 2 slides then for me, please. What I do want to say is, you know, we're not, because this is not OPOC 101, we're not really going to spend much time talking about OPOC. However, I do want to just acknowledge that, you know, what OPOC is and sort of what the value of the tool is. And OPOC is a standardized and validated tool. There previously wasn't a standardized and validated tool in the mental health and addiction sector, and it's great to have that now, supporting the use of a common language and data points for discussion purposes. OPOC does ask about client experience of care, and this is different than a satisfaction survey. So it's asking about care in relation to what is expected as standard quality practice and in relation to the client's needs and expectations, rather than as a reaction to service. And that will be important to think about as we go through the rest of this webinar. Why do we use it? You know, the important part about gathering client feedback is that it does empower service users. It empowers them to be part of the conversation and to contribute contribute to the work that they're doing moving forward and the work that you're doing. And it captures information, OPOC captures information on a variety of domains: access, the services actually provided, discharges, transitions, overall perception of care. So it's really got a full gamut of what is captured. And there are opportunities to use this data for decision-making purposes and for quality improvement purposes. And there's a number of different versions of the OPOC. So right now we kind of started with a registered and non-registered version. We have since introduced a caregiver version and a version for supportive housing. And there is a crisis version that we are actually hoping to launch in the next couple of months, and hope that that might be of value to you sooner than later as well, given the current context. So lots has been happening over the last number of years since we got started with it. There are more than 200 organizations across the province that are already using OPOC, and more than 70,000 surveys that have been entered into the provincial database. So there is a very large pool of data that's available, and organizations are using that data in a whole bunch of different ways, and we'll talk about a few of those today. Next slide, please. So we know that OPOC is a good tool. Lots of people are using it. If you're like me, you know, the last number of weeks have actually been rather challenging, both personally and professionally. We're juggling a lot. You may not even have time to think about a pee break or lunch, but you know, then trying to think of collecting client feedback and how you're going to do that, it may not even be on your radar right now. You may be completely overwhelmed by the sheer thought of thinking about, I've got so much on my plate, how can I add one more thing, and think about asking clients what they're doing, how they're feeling about their services right now. It's hard to imagine doing that, and we appreciate that. One thing that is clear, though, is collecting client feedback really does ensure you don't stray too far from the needs of your community. And even as those needs evolve, and there's a lot evolving right now, perception of care feedback provides a direct measure of whether the services that you are proffering the client have met the expectations and their client's needs. And that is really important right now. Clients have a lot of different needs. We don't know what's going on. We don't know unless we ask. And if we're not, recognizing there are all these competing priorities and capacity challenges, if we're not actually meeting our clients' needs, we're not maximizing outcomes, and we're certainly not maximizing the limited resources that we do have in terms of our time, our energy, and even that of our clients. So we do know that feedback is a really great guide that helps your team get insights into helping you chart a path forward and adjusting what you do over time. And you're doing lots of adjustment. You're actually doing lots of quality improvement right now. You're doing all kinds of this QI on the fly type stuff, even if you don't recognize it as quality improvement in the moment. And there's an opportunity to kind of think about what client feedback looks like in terms of that. So we acknowledge that data collection is difficult at this time. We acknowledge that, sitting down with a client and having them do a 15-minute survey is not reasonable. There are not sufficient resources to plan this, to prepare for it, or to administer that kind of a survey right now. But how do you know how your clients are feeling about the changes to your services if you don't ask? What do you want to know from them in terms of learning about your current experience and the service shifts? What do you want to be able to continue? Do you know you're on the right path forward? So where does that leave us? If we could go to the next slide, please, Ash. So the one thing about the OPOC, it really wasn't designed to gather feedback during rapid improvement cycles as a full tool. It's a large tool. It's meant to be very encompassing and gather a full client picture. But you can use specific questions pulled from the OPOC to gather a little bit of feedback on the fly, and use that to help measure your service adjustments. The caveat is, the deal that we're sort of making here is that you do this in complement to a full administration of the OPOC at some other point in time during the year. So you're already implementing OPOC. You've already got, this great baseline data available. Some of these questions, and you've got a tool to be able to use to move forward with this QI work. But now is a time to be able to look at the OPOC in a slightly different way, to use a couple of those questions for QI on the fly purposes, to be able to talk the same language as some of your partner organizations who you're quite rapidly aligning services with, to be able to talk a common language to your funders and to the system leaders out there who are constantly asking for data at this point in time. So the OPOC really is a great starting point from that perspective. And ironically, we actually did a soft launch of guidelines to use specific OPOC questions for QI purposes in March, just before the pandemic hit. We didn't really have time to do a full launch, but we're doing that now. So I'd actually like to turn it over now to Nancy and Chris, and they're going to talk a little bit about an example from CMHA Peel Dufferin and how CMHA Peel Dufferin has implemented a process to gather client feedback on some of the service adjustments they've already made as a result of the pandemic. So Ash, I'll let you switch to the next slide and let Chris and Nancy come off mute. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Deanna. Can you hear me okay? Sure
can.
Okay, good. The unmuting worked. Well, thanks everybody. This is Chris Sullivan, implementation specialist with the PSSP, and I'm going to take a few moments now to have a bit of a conversation with Nancy Brakovich from CMHA Peel Dufferin. She's the Director of Clinical Support Services there. And Nancy, are you with us?
I am, Chris. Can you hear me?
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, good.
Awesome.
Nancy and her team recently began an exercise, an application, in fact, using selected OPOC questions for a rapid improvement project. So she and I are going to have a bit of a conversation. The rest of you are going to have a chance to eavesdrop on some of that. You're still invited, I guess, to pose a question in the chat box, and time permitting, hopefully Laura at the end can raise the question to one of us and go from there. So Nancy, thanks for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about the OPOC, sorry, the QI project and the problem that arose that encouraged you to take a closer look?
Yes, certainly. First, thanks for having me here and allowing me to share our journey so far. The decision came back in late March when obviously we were all impacted by the changes of COVID, and we had to look at how we were delivering our service model. So in addition to our regular stream of services, we created an on-demand service model, which is probably a conversation for a different day. And within that, we've got 3 tiers of community responses that we're trying to measure. And it was really important for us to look at how we can incorporate an opportunity for clients to provide feedback on those experiences, particularly now during COVID. And so we looked at how to create a survey that is short, it's quick, it's easy, much similar to our service response to the community and the clients that we serve.
Right. Now, I understand you selected a small number of the OPOC questions. Can you tell us a little bit about, which questions you chose and why those ones in particular?
Yeah, certainly. As I mentioned, OPOC has been a tool we've been using for years, and we wanted to ensure that we wanted to be consistent and familiar with what clients and what our staff already knew. So when we looked at our questions, we wanted to identify a short survey, maybe 3 questions the most, with some free text that gave us a sense of how we can measure if people are getting what they need when they need it, and in fact, are we having an impact on the quality of their life in the moment or as they need it then. So we looked at a question from the area of access. Q2 was one that we picked, which was looking at were our services available at a time that was good for them when they were starting to look for it. Q9, which focuses really around the receiving of the services. So did CMHA Peel Dufferin respond effectively to their crisis or toward their needs? As it was provided to them. And our last question was Q30, which was a quality measure. And it was really looking at, did the services they receive help them deal more effectively with life challenges? And that's, we discussed that at various levels across the organization, and we thought we're going to put it out there and test it out. I'll end with just saying there, we did add some free text because we wanted to also find out if they didn't call us or if we didn't have a visit with them in the process of this, you know, what would they have done? And this will give us a good insight in terms of what impact did we make.
So I think we all know that engaging and connecting with clients during the pandemic has been a challenge for many of the agencies that I connect with, and I'm sure for you as well as a service provider. Can you tell us a little bit about the techniques, the methods you use to engage and reach out to clients?
It was decided very early on that we were going to offer the survey to every client that we touched in the new service. So that was an established target that as an organization we made and communicated as such to our staff and our clients. Folks that are receiving case management services, those would be clients that are already on existing caseloads. Those targets would remain, which is generally it's one client per week as you work through your caseload. So when we looked at our targets and we communicated that, we ensured the message was that this is a short, rapid survey that can be done in a minute or under, and that we're asking every staff to at least offer the opportunity to every client to complete the survey. And then as we do with our normal process, it would be the client's decision at that point whether they wanted to participate.
You know, in normal times of administering the OPOC, agencies are invited to present clients with a client information letter, and coincidentally on the back side of the letter is the OPOC key, which we won't get into here, but I think everybody knows the OPOC key connects a client's, a survey to a particular program. Did you use something like a client information letter to cover some of those areas of risk and benefit and anonymity and confidentiality in the exercise?
Yeah, we do. We modified it a bit because it needed to make sense this time during COVID. So our processes are either completing a survey by phone or email is the option that the clients have. So we created a script for our staff that they could either use themselves in conversations, or they can provide parts and pieces of that script in an email text or a text message to their clients. So the staff script has been modified from our general process that prompts them to highlight, you know, what is the purpose of the survey, what are the options that the client has to complete them, and of course, you know, that the survey is their choice and it is confidential.
Now, like most agencies, you probably have an OPOC team. Did you make use of the full OPOC team at your organization, or did you have to bring in different players to make this happen?
Yeah, well, it's pretty much the same team, or at least elements of the same team. I mean, our team does include staff and management across the organization. So we did have folks involved in that and continuously are in terms of monitoring and evaluating. Our data information analyst is there. We are reporting our OPOC COVID results every week. They're attached to our current reporting structure for COVID. So that is being looked at. Our management's been involved, as I said, staff, and also our Client Family Advisory Council has had some early stage involvement in providing feedback on the questions and just validating the process.
And I think people would like to know a little bit more about, you know, the mechanics you may have used to gather responses and how you have begun to tabulate the data and perhaps even a comment or two about some of the results that you're beginning to see realized.
Yeah, so we needed to come up with a way that we were going to collect that feedback and have a very quick ability to pull those reports together. As I said, we're looking at them almost daily and reporting them formally every week and in a management huddle. So SurveyMonkey was an option that we considered. We've used it across the organization for other other surveys, staff surveys, and our educational department surveys. So we attempted to use that, and it allows for that anonymity. It allows for clients to feel that this is private and confidential. We're not asking any personal information. So that is the tool that we decided to use. We did create a whole reporting process which rolls up the data, and of course it may not be as extensive as the OPOC reporting platform. However, it gives us a very good qualitative and quantitative measure of what's currently going on. So even though it doesn't replace the normal, OPOC process that we've implemented, it allows us to, at least in a very quick and rapid way, view what the survey responses are. We do get some really great narratives in that too. So it's nice to read what people are feeling.
Good. We just have a couple of minutes left. What do you foresee as your next steps moving forward? I know you've only been involved in this exercise for maybe a little over a couple of weeks now, but what can you tell us your projections going forward?
Yeah, well, it's been really, really exciting. I wanted to actually highlight that we just had our report huddle this morning, and we've got 36 responses in just over two and a half weeks of collecting data. So that's been really, really exciting. And it's been an interesting measure because we're also looking at what the provincial average is, and we're looking at trend lines. So one of the things that we've learned from last week even is that how is that data being viewed and interpreted? So trend line was something that we weren't tracking initially that we are going to start to put in so that we can start to see, well, what in fact is it doing differently? What, how is the impact of our services now any different than to how we usually run our services and provide support to our clients? So we've had a great response. 80% of those who have responded and completed the survey did so by email. So I wanted to stress the email option to click and go into a very brief SurveyMonkey survey was great. So and I think that the number of responses we've had is because of that. And the other 20% was phone calls that were delivered by our receptionists and some of the program admins that are being deployed to do different functions in the organization. So it's been great so far. So I guess to your point around learning, Chris, it's, when we look at the reports today, we learned that we needed to create some more robust reading and interpretation of those reports. We also learned by that, we might need to ask some questions, like it's not always a call that comes in or that we're supporting with, we're actually meeting with people. So we need to talk about those experiences with the visits. So with the true PDSA format, we're reviewing, evaluating, and every week we tend to be changing a little something through this experience.
That's great. This is great. I think, thank you for what you're doing, and thanks for sharing. I did see some questions come up in the chat box. Deanna and others may have already responded to a few of them, but hopefully, time permitting, we're on a tight timeline this afternoon. Some of the answers, some of the questions can be provided, and we'll look to get an answer. So the slide deck is with me. If we can move on to the next slide, talk a little bit about the guidelines. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris.
The OPOC tool was, as you all know, designed and for widespread use and adoption across the entire mental health and addiction sector, funded by the Ministry of Health. It provides comprehensive and standardized method for gathering service user feedback. And while implementation approaches can vary from agency and program, organizations are always encouraged to use it at least once, as Deanna reiterated. So this is just a reminder that the exercise that we're envisioning here is really not a substitute, but really just a complementary opportunity to take advantage of a situation. There are occasions when agencies may wish to use some of the OPOC questions for alternate purposes, and that's certainly this is a great time for doing that. For example, an agency may want to initiate a quality improvement project and want to use only a few questions to gather feedback during a rapid improvement cycle, much like Nancy and I were just discussing. We do have some guidelines, and there is a document on which these and some other ones are laid out, and they'll be part of a package coming out to all the registrants for today's webinar. And that is a reminder, of course, is a complimentary exercise. The questions in the OPOC version that you use, should remain intact. They were written purposefully to be actionable and so on. So we ask that they remain as they are written. Ideally, there's an exercise and a discussion, conversation happening inside the agency, with purpose to identify the most appropriate questions for the issue or the problem that you've identified inside the organization. And Nancy's example was a great example of sitting down and identifying what might be, a few questions, choosing 3 in their case to address the issue that they presented. In the guideline document that you receive, you'll see a footnote that is suggested that be attached if, in fact, you are going to use something like a SurveyMonkey or paper, or even a phone might be a bit more challenging, but at least make reference to the fact that the questions have been chosen from the OPOC instrument, and things are properly footnoted. Data analysis will be, and is the responsibility of the agency. Nancy's example is a good one, making use of the abilities of the SurveyMonkey tool. In a few moments, Deanna is going to share with you something that we've created that we can share with you to do some of the data analysis. Access to the OPOC portal is not going to be made available for this particular exercise. And of course, additional questions, may be asked from time to time if over and above, what comes from the OPOC. If we could go to the next slide and talk a little bit about considerations before I pass it over to Deanna. There are several key considerations to take into account when choosing, questions. So, for example, it's a reminder that to all that each individual item on the OPOC tool reflects a specific standard of care that the client should receive within the particular program that they're a part of. And each individual item should not be interpreted beyond the item itself. In other words, individual questions and responses are not representative or predictive of responses across the particular domain. So Nancy's example of picking question 2, that's part of the access and entry domain, just gives her information on question 2, not the entirety of the particular domain. Administering only select questions, is not a method that's been tested. We're trying it out now, and weeks and months from now, we may have a chance to follow up with those agencies that are attempting to do this and have a bit of a lessons learned a situation and gather, best advice from the field about having used selected questions and some of the things to remember and challenges to overcome. Treatment and socio-demographic questions, if they're not asked, the client's full experience, cannot be viewed through the health equity lens. So something to be mindful of. Reports are not automatically generated, as you know. Access to the reporting portal will not be part of a selection of OPOC questions for internal QI purposes like this. Doing your own data analysis, of course, will be required, and organizations are encouraged to inform, check in with their friendly neighborhood PSSP implementation coach to check in and get some best advice, check in, get some consideration on what it is they want to do and seek advice. We meet and discuss and share regularly, so we can often harvest information, harvest good ideas from each other who are working out in the field. So with that, I'll pass it over to Deanna.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Nancy. So yeah, I let Chris do the legal mumbo jumbo there. So that was what I think that was pretty kind of me. I get to talk a little bit more about some of the nitty gritty stuff, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time now going into the actual how-to. As Chris flagged, we've got implementation specialists available from PSSP to talk through OPOC stuff with you. We've got QI and data coaches available through the E-QIP side of things, through MHO and CMHA. So there's lots lots of support to do this, and in some cases it may make sense to get an OPOC coach and a QI coach on the phone together if you'd like a little bit of support, and we can certainly provide that as necessary too. Just a couple of flags now, and this is almost more of a introduction to the next webinar. So in about 3 weeks time, we're going to do a follow-up webinar to this, and it's going to be more in detail of how you might do this, how might you look at the ins and outs of tracking data and looking at it and doing it quickly. So the idea is that none of this is cumbersome, that it's quick and easy to do, does not require a lot of extra effort on your part, and that really is the goal. So just, before you begin, you need to ask the right questions, and Chris and Nancy alluded to this. Like, what part of the client experience would you like to improve? Are you trying to look at access to virtual care? Are you trying to look at whether the adjusted service is meeting your client's needs, or are you looking at overall service quality of your new adjusted services? And what is your plan for the data that you collect? Maybe you're trying to test changes that you've implemented, as was the case for Nancy and her team. Maybe you want to see how your service delivery right now compares to your service delivery before the pandemic started. And Nancy also alluded to this in terms of how they're tracking trends and looking at provincial data, looking at perhaps their baseline data where from their OPOC, and maybe looking at OPOC data again later on. What is the best approach for collecting this feedback? So Nancy shared how they're collecting feedback using email or phone surveys. Is it best to do it just right at the end of a session where you're asking the question right there? Is it best to do a survey link? So there's lots of different options for doing that, and we'll go into a little bit more detail in our next webinar as well. Next slide, please. So just also want to flag, so Nancy mentioned that she and her team are using SurveyMonkey to gather and track client feedback. And we have also developed a scoring and tracking template for you to help do easy data entry that's specific to the OPOC. So you can put in your program in terms of just being able to click the question that you want to track. So Nancy's team tracked question 2, question 9, question 30, and you just quickly enter the scores in there. And then the next slide, actually, please. What the tool will actually do for you is produce a report that looks much like the OPOC report that you're used to seeing. So tracking the number, the percentage of responses in each category, your response rate. And the next slide, please. And it also will give you a nice little chart. So those who have a magical ability with Excel have been able to do this for you. So it automatically will populate a stacked bar graph, so you can kind of compare the questions that you have. And also what we are looking at doing right now in the next iteration of this is being able to put in another tab that will allow you to use run charts to track some of your data over time. And we can talk a little bit more through that at our next webinar. Next slide, please. And actually, I'm going to turn it back to Chris for just kind of a final wrap-up and Q&A.
I know we're running up against the end of the time, so be very quick. I apologize if it's way too fast, but it is what it is. So really, some tips. You've already sort of heard some of the examples that have been used in real life situation, but some tips for administering OPOC virtually. Meeting with a client, asking questions after the meeting with a client or at the end of the client session might be the best thing. Nancy's example of, that only really happened with 20% of the cases. For the most part, using the SurveyMonkey and a link was really the most appropriate and sort of yielded the best results for them. But if it's to be phone, then consider towards the end of the session. And if it is going to be the phone, maybe someone other than the direct service provider. We know one of the recommendations in the OPOC is to have maybe someone else provide facilitation other than the direct service provider, just to eliminate any kind of influence. But if that's not available during these times, then whoever can should be available. The SurveyMonkey does provide some anonymity in that the answers are aggregated when they're received, so that's a good way of separating out any kind of personal responses from particular clients. agencies may have access to something along the Facebook lines or through a Facebook page, or if they have a well-developed website, they may be able to integrate an interactive survey right there, similar to, if not identical to, SurveyMonkey. Next slide, please. We have prepared a FAQ document to go with all this. That will be part of the distribution after today's webinar. And there's about 15 to 20 questions on there with some answers. And it's a living document. As we go through this, there are other questions I'm sure that we'll need to provide answers to for this kind of exercise. So we have 15 to 20 as a start, including some of the ones you see here. You know, do I need an OPOC key? It's just a small version of a traditional campaign. Some of these we've already answered here this afternoon. What about confidentiality and anonymity? To, you know, hallmarks of OPOC administration. So there are some guidelines to those issues in the FAQ document. You'll see. What about the MOU that we made everybody sign, and it said, you know, we had to do this, this, and this, and suddenly we have freedom to do some other things? Well, yes, as Deanna alluded to, so long as you know, commit and have used OPOC and commit to use it again, this is an opportunity to do something on the fly for a particular QI project. So again, reach out to our OPOC colleagues for help and advice. So perhaps we'll, with the few moments we have left, look at what kind of questions might be pressing in the chat box.
Yes, so this is Laura. I was just looking through the chat box, Chris, and the first question that had come up was from Todd with regards to the format that Nancy used to get the questions to the client and back. I think that that question was answered.
Right. SurveyMonkey was most popular. Yeah.
That's right. And then the other questions, Nancy has been answering them as you have been speaking. And then there was a suggestion that perhaps some of these questions could be linked. So the individuals that are asking the questions could be linked to Nancy directly via I guess they wanted to reach out to us. So some of the questions were related to the script that was used. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Nancy had answered that. Were there any others on there, folks, that are also, I don't want to miss any questions.
It's Deanna. I think Nancy's done a great job of answering everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are there any other questions that people have? Okay, it's nice to see some excitement that you've generated, Nancy, from your example. Chris, maybe you can carry on. Sure.
Well, we suddenly have 6 minutes left. I thought we'd be more rushed for time, but that's okay. Just a reminder with respect to resources. So the guidelines document will be coming out shortly, I guess, as part of a package with the tracking template, right? The Excel spreadsheet that Deanna had a chance to quickly kind of go through. You can play around with it, try it out if in fact you want to make use of it over and above or in addition to you know, something like a SurveyMonkey. The FAQ document that I alluded to very briefly with a sample of questions is ready and available and will be, I think, distributed as well. And the QIOnTheFly template, which we don't have a picture of, but some of you may have seen it through other medium. Basically asks a series of questions, much like what I posed to Nancy about problem and hoping to achieve. You know, why did you identify this particular problem? You know, who did you consult, and those kind of things. And it's a chance, I guess, to provide, you know, put in your own answers and use it as sort of an action plan for in-house, and potentially share with others as well. I'm not quite sure if the slide deck is going to be shared or not. Others may have an answer to that particular question as part of the distribution. I think that'll come with an evaluation link as well. So I defer to who knows more about that.
Yeah, so I've just been, I cannot answer the question, sorry, Chris, about the slide deck. I'm 99.9% sure, though, that we can share the slide deck.
Yeah, I just couldn't remember what we did last time. I know it's being recorded and will be available on the YouTube channel shortly.
Yeah, I'm sure somebody will.
Yeah, we definitely can make the slide deck available. We did the slide deck from the first session is available through the E-QIP.ca site that's posted up right now. The videos will also be available through our YouTube channel. The video for our first session, unfortunately, is not yet up, but we will get this one up faster. You can also reach out to us through E-QIP.ca to get in touch with Nancy or get in touch with us. For those of you who have Nancy's email, please feel free to reach out to her directly, but we're happy to facilitate as well.
Thanks, Noshabah. And so we have our QI quick webinar series and newsletter links here. And we'd invite you to take a look at this particular link if you are wanting to have a refresher for yourself or others in your organization around some of those QI bits and pieces through the model for improvement. We have some really great client engagement stories and videos on there as well. So let's take a look at that link, and then the next slide, please. And then we really, in the spirit of good QI, we would love to hear back from you about your thoughts around this particular webinar. We are also really interested in knowing what you would like to hear more about based on what you've heard today, and what future topics would be of interest to you and your organization in the current context. So please take a few minutes to do the survey for us, and we will definitely take a look at your responses and make some changes at our end if needed, or add in content if there is an interest, a particular interest in an area. So if you could do that. And then our upcoming webinar is number 3. Using the perception of care indicators for rapid improvement cycles, the how-to sequel. So in this webinar, we're going to be examining the client-tenant perception of care, understand if you're meeting your current service delivery goals, and looking at and collecting, interpreting those responses to those key OPOC questions in a new scoring tool, similar to what we saw today, and then looking at the story from the data side of things in a run chart to see how you can interpret that information and use that in your improvement work. And that's happening on Tuesday, May the 26th from 1 until 2, and the registration link is there in the slide deck. And of course, a huge thank you to our presenters today. Thank you to all of you for coming and spending the time with us today to learn more about what's happening at other organizations in terms of that QI on the fly and using the OPOC tool. And we're really thankful for the time that you've spent with us today.
Okay, thank you.